Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvasatbuddhimapnotu, sarvasarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we resume our study today on verse number 132, the study of the description that is being given about the Atman, the true self in our hearts. Atraiva sattvatmanidhi guhayam avyakritakasha ushat prakashaha akasha uchchairavivat prakashate Swatejasa Vishwamidam Prakashayan. Illumining this whole universe by its own light, the Atman shines like the midday sun with its bright effulgence, here in the body, in the pure mind, which is the cave of the heart, and in the undifferentiated space. Illumining the whole universe by its own light, just like the sun illumines the world during the day, and because of the light of the sun, we are able to see everything. How does the Atman illumine everything? By just making us aware of everything. Atman is pure awareness. Only when we become aware of something, we know it, we can see it, we can hear it. Without awareness, there is no knowledge. And that awareness, the source of all awareness, is the Atman. And therefore, if we are aware of the world, that awareness comes from the Atman. And that is why the Atman illumines the whole universe by being the source of all awareness. The Atman shines like the midday sun with its bright effulgence. So the analogy often given in books is of light, because the light illumines everything. And here is the light of knowledge. So it's not the physical light, obviously, but it's the light of knowledge. So not only does the Atman illumine everything that is happening outside, but it illumines, shines here in the body. Because the Atman shines or illumines this body, we are aware of this body. We will not be aware of our own bodies if the Atman did not make it possible. In the pure mind, which is the cave of the heart, the Sanskrit is Sattvatma Dhi Guhayam, and the reference here is to the Sukshma Sharira. So just as the Atman illumines this gross visible body, the Atman also illumines the subtle body. How do I know that the Atman illumines a subtle body? Because I'm aware of everything that is happening in my mind. If the Atman were not illumining it, if I did not have that awareness, I would not know about the joy, the sorrow, the fear, the thoughts, the memories, everything that is there in the subtle part of my personality becomes known to us only because of awareness. And that awareness is provided by the Atman. The cave of the heart, again and again, in the Upanishads and in other Vedanta texts, you'll always have this analogy of a cave. Now, many of us have seen caves, and we know that usually they are very dark. Usually if you want to know what's inside it, you will need to have some light. In India, there are these well-known caves in a place they are called the Ajanta and Ellora caves. There are many amazing Buddhist sculptures deep inside the cave. And there's also a Hindu temple. In fact, that's one of the most famous caves in Ellora. The entire temple, it's called Kailasa cave. The entire temple of Shiva is constructed with just one huge rock. And that the temple is often cited as an example in many texts about how everything is just made of consciousness, or everything is made of just one entity but taking different forms. It's so amazing to even imagine. This was long before modern technology came into being. Centuries ago, what planning, what vision they may have had. It's not even done in a matter of, say, 5 or 10 years. Probably took a generation or two. So this was kind of a master vision that they started carving inside this huge rock on the mountainside, and everything there, the entrance, the pillars, the flooring, the roof, the altar, the deity on the altar, the puja vessels that you use, everything is made of stone, and just one stone. And then of course the Ajanta caves, you always need some light inside to be able to see these great paintings and the sculpture there. So similarly, the heart, the spiritual heart, is often described as a cave. And all meditators are aware of this. When we begin meditating, what we see externally is someone just sitting with closed eyes. But what is that person seeing? And those of us who have tried to meditate know that in the beginning, when we close our eyes, just darkness, as if you are inside a cave. Now, in order to see what is inside a cave, we need light. Now, that light is provided by the Atman. That light exists even now. And what the Upanishads point out is that presently that light is going outward through all of our senses. Because that light goes out through the eyes, I'm able to see things. Because of that light coming out through the ears, I'm able to hear sounds. But all of these senses are projected outward. And therefore, we don't have any difficulty as long as our senses are working fine and the body is relatively healthy. We are able to hear the sound, taste, smell, touch, sights without difficulty. All we need to do is just open the eyes and we see what's in front. Because awareness is supporting the activities of all these senses. But all the senses are going out. And when we are trying to meditate, what we are trying to do is to look inside. And our senses are not programmed to look inside. They're just looking outside. And therefore, meditation needs a lot of effort because we are trying to swim against the current as if. It's almost like all the traffic is going in one direction. And then you suddenly decide, now I want to take a U-turn. You know how difficult it is. If everyone is going in one direction, you just can't suddenly turn. Now that's what's happening to us. When we try to meditate, when you open the eyes, we can see the world. When we close the eyes, it's just darkness because everything is trying to go outside. And we therefore try to shut our senses. When we meditate, we close our eyes so that don't go out. Of course, if you want, you can put earplugs, but what many of us try to do is we try to sit in a quiet spot. We generally try, I think most people try not to eat while meditating. So what we try to do is kind of figuratively shut the senses to prevent that awareness from going out. But how to make it turn inward, how to make it take a U-turn, that needs effort. But once we are able to turn the direction of that light of awareness inside, then that cave, which is in darkness, begins to get illumined. Then we begin to see what is inside that cave. And that is where then the meditator discovers their Ishta, their chosen deity, the way they try to meditate on God. So that's why it's called in the pure mind, which is the cave of the heart. And as I have mentioned on earlier occasions, the word heart, I won't go into details, but enough to point out at this time that most of us, when we first speak about the heart, we think about the anatomical heart, the heart which pumps blood. But that's not the heart that is meant here. There is not much space for the God to sit into that heart. But we know that the word heart is also used as the seat of emotions. Oftentimes when we feel very emotional, when we are overwhelmed with something, we just touch our heart. Even in language, you say, I say this from the bottom of my heart. My heartfelt joy. So we use the word heart even to refer to emotions. So there is the emotional heart. So one is the physiological heart, then there is the emotional heart. As distinct from both these is the spiritual heart. So, although it's going to sound very odd, we have three hearts. We know, none of us has seen our own heart, but we know from studying human anatomy or that the heart is here, somewhere in a little bit to the left side. And all that we know is all these three hearts are somewhere in this area. We know the general location. It's as if no one has visited the Vedanta Center before and they know, well, it's somewhere near Kenmore Square. So you know the general location, but you haven't really been there. So similarly, we know the general location of the heart. It's here. So in the beginning of spiritual life, when we try to meditate, the first struggle most of us have is in locating that heart first. Because only when we locate the heart, then we are able to bring that light of awareness there and then discover our Ishta there. So that's how the process generally takes place. So that is what is referred to here in the pure mind, which is the cave of the heart. And the reference here is to the Sukshma Sharira, the subtle body. And the final, in the undifferentiated space, it's called the Avyakrita Akasha, and that the reference is to the Karana Sharira, the state we are in, or the covering which is upon us in the deep sleep state. So these are what we studied in the preceding few weeks, that there are these three major layers covering the self. The outermost layer is the gross body. The inner layer is called the subtle body. And the innermost layer is called the causal body or the Karana Sharira, which is nothing but Maya or Avidya or ignorance, as we saw. So what this verse points out is that it because of the Atman, which is pure awareness, that not only are we aware of the world outside, but we are aware of our body, we are aware of the subtle body, and we are also aware of our own ignorance, aware of the causal body. Verse 133. Jnata manoham kriti vikriyanam dehendriya prana krita kriyanam ayogni vatta nanu vartamano na cheshtate no vikaroti kinchana. The Atman is the knower of the changes in the mind and the ego, and of the activities of the body, the senses, and the prana. Like fire in a piece of iron, it neither does anything nor is transformed in any way. Continuing with what we were discussing, what this verse points out is that all of the changes that occur in the mind and the ego, we become aware of them through the Atman. Not only the changes in the mind and the ego, but also the activities of the body, the senses, and prana. Everything that is happening to us, all knowledge that we have about us occurs because of the Atman. Now, it just seems as if Atman is doing a lot because it's making all of this knowledge possible. And therefore, the verse points out the Atman is really not doing anything. All the doing belongs to the body, mind, and senses. The activity is in the body, mind, and the senses. All that the Atman is doing is just being present. The presence of the Atman is enough for the activities to go. A rather crude example of that might be if in a certain workplace, if people are a little bit lazy or are trying to avoid the work as much as possible, but as soon as the boss enters the room and stands there, then when they know that they are being watched, then everybody does their work very smoothly. Or it's like if the teacher is present in a class, the students suddenly become very disciplined. When there is nobody in the class, then they are not so disciplined. Now, in these kind of instances, the boss in the office is not really doing anything. The boss is simply there. But the presence of the boss makes all the activities go smoothly. I said it's a crude example, but this is a little bit like that. The Atman doesn't do anything, but the presence of the Atman makes all the activities possible. It's also because of the presence of the Atman, we even know that the activities are occurring because awareness and knowledge go together. The example that is given here, and this in the last part of this verse, you see, like fire in a piece of iron, it neither does anything nor is transformed in any way. So this is the example that often comes in Vedanta texts, that if you have, if you go to a blacksmith's place, for instance, if there's, let's say, a big iron spherical ball of iron, and you heat it in fire, and then after some time, when it's heated, that iron ball become red hot. Now, here, if that iron ball, which is red hot now, touches something or just, it'll burn. But that burning is really not done by the fire, but really by that ball, because of that iron ball. So the fire itself doesn't have any specific shape. The shape also belongs to that iron piece. the fire itself doesn't change, but it's the iron piece that when it's hot, it becomes red hot. When it cools down, it goes back to its natural color. So all changes, all activities belong to the piece of iron, not to the fire itself. And therefore, this is the kind of example that is often given in books to show that all changes, all activities belong to material things. The Atman is the non-material entity. Therefore, nothing changes, nothing is done. And so, this gives us a clue that we are told again and again that we are the Atman. What it means, in effect, is that we don't do anything. We don't change. But right now, our experience is very different. We feel we do so much. In fact, people are tired. It's like, I'm so tired of doing things. I need some rest. The truth is, we are eternally at rest. But we don't know that because we have forgotten we are the Atman. And we have gotten identified with the body, mind, and senses, which are really doing everything. The changes are occurring in the body, mind, and senses. But because I've become identified with them, I feel I am changing. That's why I feel that some years ago, I was a little baby. Now I have grown up. After a few years, I'll grow old and I will die. All of these changes that are occurring are in the body, not in me. Birth and death belong to the body, not to the Atman. So, Vedanta practice, the very basic practice really, is to simply know I am not the body and the mind. I am the Atman. That's all. It's very simple in telling, but when we try to practice it, we know how tough it is. Even to hold the thought that I am not this body and mind, even for a minute, even for 30 seconds, it's not so easy. So all of these other spiritual practices that we do, whether it's japa, meditation, study, selfless work, all of these are really meant to make us strong enough to give us that clarity that we will know ultimately that we are the Atman. This idea is stressed in the next verse as well, 134. न जायते नो म्रियते न वर्धते न क्षीयते नो विकरोति नित्यः विलीयमानेऽपि वपुष्यमुष्मिन् न लीयते कुम्भ इवाम्बरं स्वयं. The Atman is eternal. It is not born. It does not die. It does not grow. It does not decay. And it does not change. The Atman is independent. It is not destroyed when the body is destroyed. Just as the space inside a jar is not destroyed when the jar is destroyed. Very clear. This last example also is an example often used in Vedanta text. Ghata and Ghata Akasha. Akasha is the space. So the space inside a jar or water for that matter. If you go to the ocean and take a container and fill that container with that ocean water. Now, if that water could speak, if you spoke with that water before you filled that container, you say, hey, who are you? Maybe that water might say, I'm ocean water. And then you fill that water with the jar that you have taken, and then look at that water in your jar and say, hey, who are you? What's your name? He said, I'm a jar water. Now, this water in the jar thinks it's the jar water because it seems to have this boundary by the jar. Now we say we break the jar, and then that water goes back to being the ocean water. Nothing has changed. That water was always the ocean water. But its identity kind of got constricted or limited by this limited body of the jar. That's what had happened to us. We are this infinite, all-pervading consciousness. But this jar of the body, now someone asks this infinite consciousness, who are you? Oh, I am this human being. But a time will come when these limiting containers, and we have really three, simply the body going doesn't solve the problem, because there is another container inside called the subtle body. There is another container called the causal body. All these three containers have to go. Then this consciousness, which is always eternal, will finally know that it is eternal. That's why this example of the space inside a jar is often given, to show that the space is unchangeable, unbreakable. We can create artificial boundaries and say, look at for that matter, even on the planet Earth. Land is land. But then we now, these human-made boundaries we set. We say, this is this country, that is this country. To go from this place to there, you need a visa, you need a passport. But essentially, there is just one planet. But we create these divisions. It's like someone was flying down to the southern hemisphere and looking out of the window saying, I want to see the equator. No, there is, equator is a line that you see on the maps. But actually, if you actually fly, there is no really line. So all of these boundaries and demarcations that we make are very fragile, are really meaningless from a higher standpoint. So similarly, me limiting my identity to just this particular shape and form and say I'm a human being is as artificial a boundary as the boundaries we create between nations, or for that matter, between even, say, this is my property and my neighbor's property, and so on. Verse 135. Prakriti vikriti bhinna shuddha bodha svabhavaha sadasad-idam-ashesham bhasayan nirvisheshaha vilasati paramatma jagradadishvavasthasu aham ahamiti sakshat sakshi rupena buddhehe. The Supreme Atman is distinct from the material cause, Prakriti, and its effects. Its nature is pure consciousness. It is free from attributes, and it illumines the entire gross and subtle universe. In the waking and other states, it manifests directly as I, the witness of the intellect. You'll find the adjective Supreme Atman used. Now, the Atman is one and infinite. So the qualifier Supreme is really unnecessary. But because the Atman is the self, but right now, when I think of the self, the I within me really refers to the ego. So the ego, to distinguish the Atman from this present kind of a fake self, if you like, or the self, or the something that pretends to be me, to distinguish it from that, we have this adjective called supreme put before the Atman. Now this is distinct from the material cause because the Atman is the immaterial, non-material entity. The nature of the Atman is pure consciousness, as we saw. It is free from attributes, can't be qualified by anything, and it illumines the entire universe. We saw this also in the earlier verses. In the waking and other states, it manifests directly as I, the witness of the intellect. Two things to keep in mind here. One is the phrase pure consciousness. So, by pure consciousness is meant consciousness itself, objectless consciousness, if you like. It's a distinction between light and the objects illumined by light. It's with the help of light we see everything, but we cannot see light itself. Light cannot be seen. But I know there is light because I see objects that are illumined by light. So similarly, consciousness, and we become aware of everything because of consciousness. And that's how the word consciousness often gets used. It seems to always need an object. I'm conscious of the tree. I'm conscious of the table. Now, if there is no object at all, what would be the state of that consciousness? Is consciousness even needed? Can consciousness even exist if there is nothing to be conscious of? It's like asking that if there was no earth, nothing to see, then the sun is useless. Would the light of the sun be even there if we were not there? And we can understand that the light of the sun doesn't depend on us. We depend on the sun's light. But the sun's light can be there even when we are not there. So in the same way, consciousness does not depend on any objects. Consciousness can be there by itself. So that kind of a consciousness itself is called pure consciousness. The second thing to see here is that the last phrase, if you see, it manifests directly as I, the witness of the intellect. Now, we have to be careful here. At present, the I that I feel, the I that every one of us feels in our heart, that's not really the Atman. The I that we feel right now is really the ego. The Atman is beyond this I. The I beyond the I, if you like. The real I. It's almost like, again, going back to that kind of an example I gave before, it's like if you're newly joined into some company and you're yet to know how the hierarchy in that company is. So you're working in your office and suddenly the manager comes and you think that manager is like the topmost boss. And so you get up and you start saying, and then the manager also doesn't tell you what his position is. And then you show all respect and reverence and whatever way you deal with your superiors. And then finally the real one comes, the CEO or whoever, the big boss. And then you suddenly realize, oh, this was not the real one at all. I was just wasting my time and energy trying to please this person. That's a little bit like that. Right now, although it says it manifests as I, right now there is an I manifesting in our heart. But that's this mid-level manager. And we think, oh, that's the Atman. No, that's not the Atman. When you see the real Atman, experience the real Atman, then you say, oh my God, all my life I spent that this was that I, but this was not the real I. That's the idea here. Verse 136. Niyamitamanasāmum tvam swamatmānamatmani ayamahamiti sakshat viddhi buddhi prasadat janimarana taranga para samsara sindhum pratara bhava kritartho brahma rupena samstha. With the help of a disciplined mind and a purified intellect, experience the Atman directly to be your own self. Cross this unbounded ocean of samsara, whose waves are birth and death, and become fulfilled in dwelling securely in Brahman consciousness. Disciplined mind, niyamitamana, the mind that is under control. That is the first thing every spiritual seeker needs to do, to bring the mind under control. Unless the mind comes under our control, we wouldn't be able to make any progress. It's like training of a pet. If you have a dog at home, you know that if the dog is well trained, the dog can bring you so much joy. But if an untrained dog can be a nuisance, can give you a lot of headache. And so look upon your mind as your pet. Said, this mind, if I train the mind well, it'll bring me a lot of joy. And it'll be very helpful. And so a disciplined mind is a well-trained dog, if you like. A purified intellect, buddhi prasada. What is a purified intellect? There are two major hurdles in study of Vedanta, which could be considered as like two major impurities, if you like, if you want to use that word. One is called asambhavana, and the second is called viparita bhavana. Because the principle is actually very simple, that in reality, we are the self, infinite, pure, free. We are not the body, we are not the mind, we are not the ego. Plain and simple. It's not complicated at all. What makes it complicated is this first hurdle called asambhavana. Asambhavana means it's primarily a doubt. It's like, how can I be the infinite Atman? How can I be birthless and deathless? I'm seeing this body, I'm seeing this mind, I know this is me, right from the time I was born, I am seeing it this way. And suddenly some book comes and says, no, you are the infinite one, you are the immortal one. How is that even possible? This kind of thinking of the mind, this kind of doubts, these kind of questions is the first hurdle that comes. Now when this hurdle comes, we need to then reflect. So the first practice is listening to the truth, shravana. Now, someone who doesn't have these hurdles, as soon as they hear the teacher say, you are the infinite one, you are the Atman, they say, yes. Because there are no hurdles to that knowledge, they immediately realize, aham brahmasmi, I am the infinite one, free. No spiritual practice, nothing. They don't have to study this Vivekachudamani text also. All that they need to do is just hear the words of the teacher, say, you are the infinite one. Such people are there. They are called the Uttama Adhikari, the highest category of students. But then most of us, we hear this, intellectually it's very inspiring, it makes sense at one level, but then there is always this doubt, like, how is it even possible? How can I be sure it is like this? How can I believe this? That is called asambhavana. So that is the first hurdle. The second hurdle, so let's say we reflect on this, manana, that's the second practice. We do manana, we keep on reflecting, and finally the mind understands. The intellect grasps the idea, yes, now I see how I can be this eternal, infinite being. And then, of course, the examples we have seen earlier about the rope and the snake and superimposition and ignorance, all of these ideas, when we reflect on it, kind of make sense. Yes, it's possible for me to be this infinite one, but because of ignorance, right now I don't experience that. Still, it's very at the intellectual level, but it makes sense. We are no longer doubting the truth of it. But the second hurdle is called viparita bhavana. And that is, even though intellectually appreciating and grasping the idea that I am the infinite one, I still say, but I still feel I am the body. I keep on reading I am your divine. I just feel very human. I keep reading you are birthless and deathless, but I just feel I was born and I'm going to die. So these contrary ideas, which I can never get rid of, in spite of intellectually understanding the truth, that's called the Viparita Bhavana. Now, in order to remove this second hurdle, one has to do this practice called Nididhyasana, a deep meditation. So when these two hurdles are removed, then the intellect becomes pure. So you find this phrase here, purified intellect. A purified intellect means an intellect which has become free from both of these hurdles. Unbounded ocean of samsara, apara samsara sindhu. Now, unbounded is not meant to be taken literally, because only the Atman is unbounded. Only the pure consciousness is unbounded. Everything that is material has a boundary. It is limited. It may be huge. The ocean may be huge, but the ocean is not infinite. The ocean does have boundaries. It may be much bigger boundary than a small pond or a lake, but it does have a boundary. So this word unbounded ocean of samsara is only in the sense that it's very difficult to cross. And look at it finally, it says, become fulfilled by dwelling securely in Brahman consciousness. Right now, we are dwelling insecurely in human consciousness. So if we want the most perfect security, we need to transcend our present fragile, false identification of being a mortal human being and find security in experiencing our infinite Brahman identity. That's the goal. And in various ways, this book is trying to teach us through this dialogue between the teacher and the student of how to think about these issues and what kind of practices we can evolve in order to realize the truth of who we really are. So I'll stop here today, 136, and we'll begin next week on verse number 137. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, questions, comments, yes.
Swamiji. Swamiji, what is the role of bhakti to help us overcome these two hurdles?
Bhakti, good question. You will see earlier in this book, Shankaracharya does refer to bhakti. Bhakti really is a one-pointed dedication towards an ideal. In this text, because this text is non-dualistic in its approach, it says, Shankaracharya defines it in this text. Earlier, I don't remember the verse number. It says, Swarupa Anusandhanam Bhaktiriti Abhidhiyate. Bhakti, as defined in this text, is a relentless exploration or examination of one's own true nature. So here it would mean that just as a bhakta would hold on to their ishta and focus all of their energy in meditating, praying to whichever form of the divine that they feel connected with, that is bhakti. And for those whose primary path is a impersonal, non-dualistic approach, then they would say that that same focus that devotees have towards the form of divinity they are connected with, here they would have that same single-minded devotion towards discovering their own true nature. Now, although I'm expressing it in two different ways, they're not really two different things. So even when bhakti, as we normally understand the word, generally is directed towards a personal ideal of the divine, a personal God, a God with some forms or attributes or qualities. Now, even the personal aspect of the divine, Saguna Ishvara as it is called, is nothing but the reading of that same highest non-dual reality through the lens of my mind. And for most of us, it's only very exceptional people who can begin or pursue their spiritual life right from the beginning with an impersonal ideal. And the reason for that is, as long as we are personal, in the sense that as long as I think of myself as a person, it's psychologically impossible for me to think of God in impersonal terms. That's a real challenge. A lot of people think that just because they can intellectually understand the non-dualistic idea, that they are fit for that practice. I think that's a wrong way to go at it. Because as long as I see myself as a person, as long as I see persons all around me, my mind will think of the divine in personal terms. But if I'm like not fit for that impersonal ideal, I can keep on talking about it all through my life, but at the end of it I would find I have not evolved at all. So what bhakti does is that recognizing my present identity as a person, it provides us with the divine who is also personal. And there is not just one personal form of the divine, which is good, because we know as persons we are different. Our interests are different, the way our mind thinks is different. So it's good that there are really infinite possibilities to think of God in personal terms. So the evolution of our understanding of God is directly related to our own personal evolution. In other words, when I evolve, my perception of God evolves as well. So when I'm very attached to this personality, this person, my God, in whichever way I think of the divine, will be also very personal. But eventually, with a disciplined mind and a purified intellect, as the verse points out, I begin to see that there is a deeper truth about me. I'm not just this person, that in reality, my reality transcends this perishing body, perishing mind. So when my attachment to my own form becomes less, my attachment to the form of God will also become less. Just think about how often we go and stand before a mirror. What we see in the mirror is just our form. And we say, well, that's me. And so we are attached to our forms. Otherwise, mirrors are not necessary at all. And therefore, when our hold on that, our own personal appearance, our form, our qualities, that clinging, when it becomes less, then we see that the divine we meditate on, the divine we pray to, even the form of the divine, the qualities of the divine will begin to melt. So it's not as if there is this personal God I pray to and there is this non-dual reality somewhere else. The divine is one, the reality is one. But when I see that reality through my present lens, it will appear to me in a form that speaks with me. To some people, it could be in the form of the Buddha. To some people, it could be in the form of Jesus. It could be in the form of Ramakrishna. It could be in the form of Rama, Krishna, Shiva. Any possibilities are there. With the same non-dual infinite being, through the lens of my mind, this is the way I see it. Now, when that lens becomes clearer and clearer and clearer, when it becomes more transparent, then the real nature, beyond name and form, beyond the qualities, will be revealed to us. So that's the role of bhakti in all of this. Good question. Yeah. Yeah.
Namaskar, Swamiji. In Pali, when the Buddha talked about, or let me step back, my understanding is that when the Buddha talked about feelings and emotions, there was actually no distinction in Pali between thoughts and feelings, and that he just described all of it as sensory experience. Could you comment on, from the perspective of Vedanta, on the need to distinguish between thoughts and intellect and feelings and heart?
Oh, that's a big subject, and I think I probably, because they speak about the Panchaskandhas, the five, I don't know how they, five foundations or something, I don't know how they translate it into English. So the way the word consciousness gets understood in Buddhist circles is in a little bit different way than how it is used in Vedanta, because in that formulation, consciousness is one of those five formulations. And then again, Buddhism is not one monolithic whole, because there are some major schools within Buddhism with very distinct approach to things. There is, for instance, what's called the Kshanika Vijnanavada, the Yogacara school of Buddhism, which says everything is momentary, including consciousness. Nothing lasts for more than a moment. And then there is, of course, the Shunyavada, the theory of emptiness. So it's pretty complicated and technical. So I think that wouldn't really go with this. Yes.
Namaskar. So my question is like, what is the importance of guru or guide to remove the ignorance?
Yeah, thank you. Sit down. To learn anything new, we need a guidance. Just as we went to school, we went to college because there were teachers there who taught us, and that helped us. So similarly, in spiritual life also, since it is a topic when we begin spiritual life we don't know much about, it is helpful to have a teacher, and a teacher in spiritual life is called a guru. Now, we might say, well, I can just read everything from books. That's true. Even in order to study medicine, there are medical books available, but we still feel we need to go to a medical school, if we want to pursue a medical profession and to learn from others. So, theoretically, yes, you can study even from books. But in spiritual life, what is said is that living impulse for spiritual practice can only come from another living being. Books can be helpful, of course, but we need, there is something more that is received from a teacher than what only the printed words on a book can do. And therefore, the Upanishads have repeatedly said the importance and the necessity of having a teacher in spiritual life. That's okay. Anything else?
So there are a couple online questions.
Yeah.
One is, if our body and mind are a result of Maya, how come these both are powered by consciousness?
They both are?
Powered by consciousness.
Well, Maya itself Maya is a covering over consciousness, but Maya does not cover that consciousness fully. By that I mean, we wouldn't be even aware of Maya if Maya had covered the consciousness fully. So Maya itself, the existence of Maya, or at least the appearance of Maya, we know because of consciousness. And therefore all the products of Maya, which are body and mind, their awareness also, we know that they exist because of awareness. So they are powered by awareness simply mean we become aware of their appearance through consciousness. Yeah. And it's good. If we were not aware of it, we wouldn't even know what to do with it. It's like before any treatment can be done for an illness, first we need to know that there is an illness. So we need to be aware of the problem before we are able to find a solution to it.
The next question is pure consciousness the experiencer? Is pure consciousness and awareness the same?
They're same. Consciousness and awareness, I just use it as synonymous terms. Yeah.
And so one last question. How does the jnani's mind behave? Do they have thoughts?
Sure, they have thoughts. So the best way to see that is there are several passages, actually a huge section at the end of this book itself, if you see, describes what happens when we experience that true nature. What happens when we know that we are infinite being? How does such a person behave? And in the Gita, many of us are already familiar how in the 2nd chapter, Krishna describes the characteristics of one who is enlightened. So in most classical Vedanta texts, there will be a section somewhere. It usually comes in the end, but it really can come anywhere, where they'll describe how an enlightened being behaves. What kind of changes occur when we get that highest knowledge. So we will stop here today, and next week we'll begin with verse 137. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. On Sunday, our subject will be creative imagination. And on Saturday, we'll have a meditation as usual at 6 o'clock. And next Wednesday, we will continue with this study. So we'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.